Lots of things can come up with our kids. Sometimes they have speech and language disorders. What causes those things? I've brought in an expert to help us out. In another video, Vicki, we talked about how to do therapy or to work with your little ones, especially little toddlers. What causes these speech and language disorders in the first place? Now, I know this is a little slippery, but as an expert, maybe you can help us out with this.
You know, that's a hard question. I get it all the time. Why is my child having this speech and language delay? And the first thing, you know, there are a few things we can look at that are contributing factors. One is their hearing. A lot of the times we don't think about how important the hearing is to development of language and speech. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is to make sure your child is hearing adequately.
How does this happen? I know that you can test hearing.
At the schools, I always test children's hearing before I begin testing them for their speech and language, because I want to know if their hearing is good. So it actually kind of leads into the next thing. If you're concerned about your child, one of the first things you can do is approach the school district. Now, a lot of people think, oh, my kid's only 3 years old. You know, they're not going to be in kindergarten for another 2 years. The public schools treat children with speech and language delays from 3 years old and up. And there is always, in almost every community, I haven't found one yet that doesn't, but maybe out in a rural area you might have to look a little harder. But there's also a birth to 3 program. And the school district can send you that way. So my first recommendation would be call the school district, and they will be able to help you find an assessment center either there at the district, or if your child is younger than 3, with the early intervention program that services that area.
This will depend a little bit on your community, obviously, but you can also look to resources like universities who typically have programs in audiology or speech-language pathology, and they will have students who are actually looking for practicum hours to test kids or to do these kinds of assessments. Audiology centers, hearing centers, these are places where you can get access to the kind of equipment that's necessary to test the kids.
So you're going to check with your schools. So one of the causes can be hearing. Another cause is genetic issues such as Down syndrome or autism spectrum syndrome. Those can cause speech and language delays that are just inherent with the disorder itself. So if you're really concerned, make sure you've checked with your pediatrician about any possible disorders that the child may have that's concurrent with the speech language issues.
Some of those things you're already going to be aware of.
You're going to be aware of.
If you've got a child with some special needs, but to understand that speech and language development are often affected by those kinds of syndromes or conditions.
Another cause can be environmental input or a lack thereof. So one of the things you can do is just really stimulate the environment for language enrichment, making sure that there's a lot of talk going on. In another video, we talk about how to enrich your environment language-wise. And so you'd want to just provide a really language-enriched environment for your child, and that sometimes helps with the delayed speech and language.
It occurred to me, Vicki, as you mentioned that sometimes we can't prevent something from happening, and we don't even really understand what the causes are for some of these things. With all that being said, having a language-enriched environment provides the best possible chance for your child to develop those language and speech skills.
And a lot of parents put on a lot of really educational TV or apps that are educational, and while those have some place, there is research that shows that they do not provide the same language enrichment that actual human-to-human talking does. The number of words that a child needs to hear is phenomenal, and the words they hear on video, they found, don't actually count. So you need to be talking to your child.
There's something there that's important about modeling, but also the social interaction. There's a lot of subtleties in language. There's facial expressions. There's all kinds of nonverbals that occur. in a language enriched environment. So you're saying we should actually interact with our
Interact
kids?
with our kids as much as possible.
Who knew?
But what it boils down to is most speech and language delays, we don't know the origin. We don't know what causes it. So I thought we could talk just a little bit about norms. What should a child be doing when? And the first thing I want to talk about is what's the difference between speech and language. We've been talking about that, but many people don't realize there's a big difference. Speech is our sound production, the way that we actually form words, the sounds that we say, the way we put those sounds together. So that's speech.
So if a child's having problems with S's or R's, those are two of the common ones, right?
But for a little
speech,
kid,
right?
we're talking even things like instead of saying cat, they're saying tat. We've seen that. Okay. So their sound production is just a little bit different than,
if it's
than
in
the
the
adult.
sound production, that's speech. That's not
speech.
language.
That's not language.
Gotcha.
Language is the way we use any communication mode to convey our thoughts or to interact with other people. Now, you'll see little babies, they can have language. They know how to draw you in with their face or with different things that they're doing. They can draw you in, and that is communication.
I was interacting with a young, I think 6-month-old child. And as I was trying to get her attention and get her to connect with me, and she started smiling at me and interacting, that's
communication
even
as well.
language. That's early language development.
Yeah, it is.
Because of the interaction with me, even though there's no speech involved.
Right.
Okay, I'm tracking.
So we've got speech and we've got language. As far as speech is concerned, let's talk just a little bit about parents are often very concerned about their toddler who's not saying an R or an L. There are early language sounds, and they're usually the most visual ones, like p, b, m. Those are early sounds, and we expect a child to have those very early, like at even like 9, 10, 11 months, they're starting to say ba, 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 ma, 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 da, 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 and they're saying those early sounds. So we expect those early sounds to come first, and we want them to have all of those early sounds really by the time they're 2 and they're really starting to speak, 18 months to 2 years old. The next set of sounds are going to come by the time they're 3 or 4, and that's things like G. The sounds we don't really see as much, but we still hear them. They're an explosive sound, if that makes sense. So kind of more explosive.
This comes so naturally to you because you're a speech pathologist,
Yeah.
right? But that makes some sense.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some that are a little more hidden, but they're still easily heard.
Yeah, they're more explosive. And then after 4 years old, we start to see kids get some of the harder sounds that are sustained, things like f, the F, the S, and even some kids start to get their R and L. However, the R, L, and the S, they aren't considered delayed until after the age of 6, 7, right in through there.
Oh,
it
really?
takes kids that long sometimes to get the R and the L and
That's
even
why
the S.
it's so common to hear kids with trouble with those particular sounds.
Right.
So they're not necessarily delayed.
It's not delayed. Even a child who's saying S with their tongue between their teeth, that's a really common delay at 4, 5, 6. You want to see them growing out of it by the time they're 7. And so those are some different things that you can look for, is just realize that there are norms. And so even though your child, it's so interesting though, you can have one kid who's 3 and has their perfect R and a 5-year-old that doesn't have their R, and that 5-year-old is not delayed. And so you've got to become aware of the norms. That being said, if you have a concern, please see a speech language pathologist, because I have seen some kids who do have a delay of the sounds that they should have had or would have been expected to have, and they waited quite a while thinking, well, it's normal. So if you have any concerns, please see a speech language pathologist. They'll be able to help you figure it out.
Oh, professional help? Mm-hmm.
That's the way we want to go. Now, as for language, we call it the mean length utterance. So in other words, how many words they say at a time. We expect that it's usually about the age they are. So a 1-year-old is starting to say 1 word at a time. Okay. An 18-month-old is starting to put 1, maybe 2 words together. So we expect by an 18-month-old, which should have about 20 words. And a 2-year-old should have about 50 words. And once the child gets 50 words, we see him start putting 2 words together. So a 2-year-old is starting to say, Daddy, go. Mommy, come. Look, Mom. that type of thing. You won't see a child put 2 words together usually until they have at least 50 words. So that's around 2 years old. And at about 2.5, 3, they start to put 2.5, 3 words. They might say, Mommy, go bye-bye, or Daddy in big car. There's a 4 word, but the next, usually they're talking up, Mommy, saying 2 words together. And so by the time they're 3, they should be having 3 words together. If your child is 3 and not stringing 3 words together, it might be time to seek some help.
I'm just doing the math here. I should be doing 52-word utterances.
Okay, this works until about 3.5, 4 years old. Then it starts blossoming. And it's so interesting. We've learned so much of the language rules. By the time we're 5 years old, we have very little to learn of that except vocabulary expansion. It's huge. And so we really want to give our children the best chance they can to gain that language early. Just make their environment rich, and if you're concerned, please see a speech language pathologist as soon as possible.
So we don't have all the answers to what causes these problems, but thankfully there's a lot that you can do. There's a lot of things you can do as a parent too. Vicki and I have put together the Parenting Power Up. You can see the link right over there. Check that out. We have put together the philosophy behind parenting and a lot of practical ways to apply it. It's an audio course. You can listen to it while you're working out. It's on a membership site, which means that when we update it, you get the update as a member.